Товарищ министр обороны, всесторонне оценив сложившуюся ситуацию, предлагается занять оборону по левому берегу реки Днепр. Понимаю, что это очень непростое решение. В то же время мы сохраним самое главное – жизни наших военнослужащих и в целом боеспособность группировки войск, держать которую на правом берегу в ограниченном районе бесперспективно.
Сергей Владимирович, согласен с вашими выводами и предложениями. Для нас жизнь и здоровье российских военнослужащих всегда является приоритетом. Мы должны принимать во внимание и угрозу для гражданского населения. Убедитесь, что все желающие из числа гражданского населения смогли выехать. Приступайте к отводу войск и примите все меры, чтобы обеспечить безопасную переброску личного состава, вооружения и техники за реку Днепр.
Before we return to our chief international affairs editor, Robert Parsons, just for a bit of context, Sergei Shoigu is one of the closest people to Vladimir Putin for years and years. So what does this mean? Because these images broadcast by state television.
I mean, they really have been together for years and years, very close to each other. But, you know, that was an extraordinary event. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that on Russian television. You know, and for Putin, it's humiliating. But it's interesting that Putin wasn't there. You know, it's Putin's war. It's Putin who declared the annexation of those 4 territories forever, he said, just a few weeks ago. And yet it's Shoigu who's having to take responsibility by being the man who says to General Surovikin, I give my assent, you can go ahead with the withdrawal. You know, that suggests that maybe Shoigu, despite those decades of being with Putin, may be on the way out. Things have been getting worse and worse for him. But, you know, the bit wider than the issue of Shoigu's fortune is the fortunes now of the Russian armed forces in Ukraine.
Yeah, because you heard the general say that they're unable to supply the city.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about what's actually happening in terms of combat?
Well, we've known for some time that the Ukrainians have been steadily degrading the bridges that cross the river Dnipro and make it possible for the Russians to, or did make it possible for the Russians to supply their troops on the west side of that river, or the right bank, as some would prefer it. But as the Ukrainians have destroyed those bridges, forcing the Russians to use pontoon bridges where possible, it's become increasingly difficult for the Russians to do that. And that's why we've heard General Surovikin saying that the situation has become hopeless, that it's impossible to adequately supply the men. And given that, that's fuel, that's ammunition, that's men. All food, water, all the supplies that you need for an army to function. And given that those are being steadily whittled down, it's become impossible, according to Surovikin, for the Russian army to continue. That given the circumstances and the limited territory, so it was possible for the Ukrainians to effectively surround them, forcing them back onto the river. It became, you know, the situation became so serious that the risk clearly in his mind was that the Russian army, and we're talking about 25 to 40,000 men here, that's huge, could be forced to surrender. So rather than accept the humiliation of possible surrender, I think, they've decided to take the humiliation of pulling out, crossing the river.
And you've cautioned that, well, actually, the Ukrainian authorities, you've reported that they've been cautioning that when the Russians say that they're scaling down, it could be a trap, an ambush.
Yeah, obviously the Ukrainians have, you know, good reason from the past to be very careful. It's all smoke and mirrors with the Russians. But I think this time round, it's pretty clear that that's what's happening. You don't have something like this on nationwide Russian television unless you're seriously going to do it. The Russians, it would seem to me, are preparing their population now. They're trying to do a positive spin on what's happening. But Mikhailo Podolyak, the chief advisor to Zelensky, President Zelensky, has said that the Ukrainians won't be celebrating until the last Russians have gone. That makes good sense. You know, the Ukrainians are not going to go tearing into Kherson, if they're able to even, until they're absolutely sure that the Russians really are going. And even when they have gone, the Ukrainians will have to be extremely careful because the Russians are going to be taking up defensive positions along the east bank of the Dnipro River. In other words, the city of Kherson will remain within artillery range of the Russians on the east bank. They will be able to target any Ukrainian troops going into Kherson. So it may be even the case that the Ukrainians will hold back from sending troops into the city itself.
Robert Parsons, our Chief International Affairs Editor, many thanks for that update.